All right, so we're going to begin the presentation portion of the meeting now. As I mentioned earlier, we have with us former CNJ employee Frank Reilly, who had himself a long and storied career in transportation between Jersey, starting with a dirty windowed office in Jersey City and ending at the county of Morris as the head of transportation?
Yeah, DOT.
There we go, Morris County DOT. So a long and interesting journey that allowed Frank to have an awful lot of fun. And he's going to tell us some very cool stories, right? In addition to being a railroader, he's a storyteller. So we'll hear some really interesting things. And Frank, you want to?
Okay, you gonna hit the lights?
You're a trained professional, it's okay.
Ah, nice. Whoa. Well, as you can see, my name is Frank Reilly. I worked on the CNJ for a few years. And what I didn't realize when I first went to work as a road, they had a thing called seniority. If you had lots of it, you could get any job you wanted. If you had little or none, which is what I had, you had no choice of any job virtually because a senior employee could displace you and take your job at any time. And at one time that happened to me 6 weeks in a row. I had 6 different jobs. And I loved every job I was on. And the one job I had, I'll get to it when we start the show.
Move this over here so we can hear you a little better
Okay.
for the folks at home.
So we can start the program. When I was a little kid, I lived near Denellen. My grandfather worked on the Jersey Central for 47 years. He lived across the street from the roundhouse in Denellen. And when I was a little kid, he used to take me over there and give me rides on this turntable. Put me up in steam locomotives. And when I was probably 5 years old, he put me on my first steam locomotive. And I remember the fireman opened the firebox and I saw all these flames and that heat's blasting out. I thought it was hell. Okay. Next. So I went to high school in Denellen. I joined the Army when I graduated. They built the Berlin Wall in 1961. I graduated in 61. The Army recruiter said, "Frank, we're going to teach you a trade you could use for your whole life." They put me in a combat-ready infantry outfit in West Germany. So that wasn't too bad, because when we were going over there on a ship, we got to Bremerhaven, and there was like 2,000 of us new raw recruits on a ship. And they said, "We're going to put you on troop trains to get you to your base." And I said, "Geez, that sounds like a steam engine." And I checked on it. They had in West Germany alone, which was probably a little bit bigger than New Jersey, they had 16,000 steam engines operating. Everything from narrow gauge up to 210Os. And I got to travel quite a bit. And one of the most exciting places I visited was Berlin. And the day we arrived, this was 2 years after they built the wall, things were very tense. The East Germans hated Americans. And when my buddy and I got there, we took a USO tour the first day, went through Checkpoint Charlie. They took us down this magnificent boulevard with all modern buildings. And they said, they actually let Western tour buses here, and they had to be on this prescribed route. And it showed how great communism was. And then they says, but now we're going to see the rest of the city, because under the 1948 Potsdam Agreement, the 4 Allied powers and their soldiers have complete access to all areas in West and East Berlin. And the rest of the city we saw was literally probably 50% bombed out yet, whereby West Berlin was totally built up. I talked to some of the people, they were really, I mean, just so down in the dumps. We were taking this trolley car one day out to a place called Pier Park. I said, that's where Hitler used to go for relaxation. I said, I want to see what the place looked like. So we hop on this trolley car, and it's way back in the city limits, and all of a sudden we come across this big Russian army base. And I says, wow, look at this stuff. I says, I work in the war. We only have drawings of some of that equipment, and I have a new camera with a telephoto lens, and that's what I was wearing. So I kind of stood out a little bit. But we didn't see anybody around. We got off the trolley, whip on a telephoto lens. I'm taking pictures. We went out there 2 minutes. 2 Jeeps come out with Russian soldiers who kindly invited us at gunpoint for a ride to take a closer look at their base. They interrogated us for about 7 hours. And the officer who was interrogating us wanted my camera. And I said, it took me 3 months pay. You're not getting my camera. And Buddy's saying, give him the camera. So anyway, he settled for the roll of film I had. We get back on the trolley car. We're starving. We go out to Pier Park. Finally, there's a beautiful open air cafe. And there happened to be about 200 Russian soldiers in there. So my buddy says, what are we going to do? I says, we're going to get a beer and a sausage, and we're going to sit right in the middle of them. You can hear a pin drop. We go in there, and I said, wie viel hast du? I asked in German, what time is that? If we know little they did. We struck up a conversation. One of the Russians could speak English. And I said, what do you guys think of being in the military? And their answer shocked me. We hate it. All we want to do is get out, get home, and get on with our lives. And I said, you're kidding. That's how we feel. So we have pictures of ourselves with Russian soldiers on each arm. But I did traveling all over by train. I operated 210 steam engines, pulling troop trains and the like. I had a ball for those years. I saw American Steam. Next. 3 blocks from where I was stationed is a narrow gauge, meter gauge railroad. This was the end of the line. And that building was built in the 1890s. And it survived World War I and World War II. And I used to delight going down. They had 1 train a day. They had 4 10 locomotives on the line. The roundhouse in my town, I had never seen fewer than 66 steam engines that were active. I mean, I said, boy, if this could have been the United States 40 years ago. And they had these, this is a passenger engine, a 4.6, no, it's a 210, 4.60, another 210. And they had all this massive power. It's just a fantastic place to be. They had streamlined steam engines built in 1956. That's a Pacific. This is one of our troop trains. We used to have to go up to northern Germany twice a year for 3 weeks and play war games. And I was in these were our armored personnel carriers. And the place was called Hohenfels. It was like hell on earth up there, but it was good. My last day in Germany, I took a troop train back to Bremerhaven to get a ship back. And this is me in the cab of the locomotive that pulled our troop train. It was a 460. And if you see this little lightning thing there, that meant it was okay to run under electrified territory, under cantonary. So then after I got out of the Army, I went to work for an outfit called Anchor Motor Freight in Linden, New Jersey. We carried the new cars for General Motors. They produced Pontiacs and Oldsmobiles. And this was in 1964 and 65. Everything went out by tractor trailer, including down to Richmond, Virginia. And I was a senior safety clerk, keeping personnel records, and if there was an accident nearby, I'd have to go out and investigate it. And I said to the boss, I said, you know, we ought to start shipping by rail. I said, there's 2 railroad sidings in here. Why don't we just send a experimental trip out? So the guy from the Pennsylvania Railroad, the clearance man, comes down with his pole and he measures the top of the cars and everything. He says, oh, these cars are perfect for what you want. So this is our loading ramp. Nothing fancy. Isn't that something? So what he didn't realize when he made his measurements for the height, that they had to go through the Baltimore Tunnel on a northeast corridor, which has a overhead wire and has a low clearance. Well, when these 2 cars, our first experimental cars, got down to the end of the line, it seems there was a hole about that wide burned in the roof of each car on the top level. And I thought I was going to lose my job, but they said, no, we didn't have any problem with you, Frank. The railroad made the mistake. Pennsylvania Railroad paid for, I think, 8 new cars. And we had an accident one day in downtown Newark in front of 153 Halsey Street. And I saw a sign, Employment Office, Central Railroad Company of New Jersey. So I said, no, I got nothing to lose. I always wanted to work on a railroad. I love trains. So I went in, filled out the paperwork, and in high school I took typing. I was the only male to take typing, and in those days, no guys knew typing. So I filled out the paperwork, and they said, can you type 30 words a minute? And in school I set a record and did 122 words a minute on a manual typewriter. So I sat down and went, oh, wow, you're good. They said, but we only have 1 job opening, and that's a clerk typist in a roundhouse in Jersey City. It's a horrible place to work. It's dirty. There's oil and crap all over the place. Nobody wants to work there. I said, I'd love to work there. So I got the job, and this is where I work. This was my view every day I went to work. I worked there, I think, for a little over maybe 3 to 5 months. The main line was right back here. Here's the New Jersey Turnpike. Now, all of this, including the roundhouse, is now the parking lot for Liberty Science Center. Yeah, these are train masters. We had B&O coming in there with service. They had C&O engines, lots of Reilly engines. Now, this is where my office was. But when I went in here, this window looked like that. And one day I went up and tapped on what I thought was plywood. And I said, oh, there's glass under here. So the next day I come in with a bottle of ammonia and a pile of newspapers. The boss goes out to lunch. I come in there and I clean all of the windows inside and out. So they're nice and clean, so I could see all of the locomotives out there. The boss comes back after lunch. He says, who the hell broke out all the windows in here? I says, nobody. I says, I washed them on my own time at lunchtime. He says, there's nothing out there to see but crappy locomotives. And I just smiled and I said, I know. And these are just some of the scenes down there that were normal train master, baby train master, Alcoraz 3. So the next few shots are just some of the scenes. I used to bring my camera every day. I was down here.
Okay.
This was the roundhouse here. Or that was, they had a double roundhouse. And this used to be the busiest locomotive servicing facility in the world back in the 20s. Yeah, B unit, ABA. Now, this was where they refueled and put sand in the locomotives. And you can see this is the pipe that puts sand in them, and we use sand to give better traction when the rails were wet, or there was leaves and the like on the rails, or you just needed the traction for starting up. Yep, yeah, baby face blowing. And part of the time when I worked in personnel, I hired several people. They were hurting for towermen because nobody wanted to work nights, weekends, and holidays. And my good friend Charlie Batcha went to school with me in Denellen, was a railroad nut like I was, and he wanted a job. So when I worked in personnel, we were not permitted to hire anybody who was a rail fan. In fact, if they came in and they said they liked trains, in the upper right corner of the front page of the application, they had to write, what was it? NF something, which stood for no friggin' rail fans. And they wouldn't hire you. So I talked to the head of the towerman, Gil Snell, and I said, I have a friend who's a rail fan. He'd love to come to work on the railroad. I says, I'll guarantee he'll be one of your best employees. So he let me hire Charlie. Charlie did a bang-up job. I think he qualified in more towers in his first 6 months than he said anybody else had done that. And he came to me and he says, Frank, I want you to only hire me rail fans. So, anyway, what I was going to tell you about that, the bell on these engines was hanging down below here, and he was a towerman out at RA Tower in Raritan one day, and I get a call Sunday morning about 8 o'clock. He says, Frank, this is Charlie, I'm working RA Tower. He said, train with some of the baby face ball wings just went past for scrap, and a bell fell off. And he told me where it was. He says, you better get out there fast before some kids find it. So I hopped in my car, drove out to the Raritan. Sure enough, laying along the tracks was this nice bell, which I picked up and it's in my basement.
So a big kid found it. Instead
A
of
big kid found it, right? Thank you. We had all types of motor power on a CNJ from different builders. All rail fans love the CNJ. Old Baldwin switcher. And this is one of the leased locomotives we purchased, or not released from the B&O. Another old Baldwin. And I started collecting builder's plates, so I contacted Warren Boyce, who was the purchasing agent. I said, geez, Warren, I said, I'd like to buy some builder's plates from these engines. I'd like to get one of each type. I says, can you sell them to me? He says, yeah, how's $2 each sound? I said, that sounds just about what I was thinking. So when they come into the roundhouse, lunchtime I'd go out there and carefully remove it and bring it home, tell Warren what it was from, and send him a check for $2. Yeah, this is a publicity picture taken by Adolf Vogel. Baby train master. We always had a lot of B&O power in there. It came in on freight trains. And some of the B&O freights would have 4 units on them. This was 1956 when I sent the 1000, which was America's first commercial diesel locomotive. And they sent it to the B&O Museum. No, we saw that one already. I kind of like that shot. There's the orange and blue paint scheme. a CNJ Pacific that was using commuter service out to Cranford. And here's one of the double enders from 1946. Occasionally, we'd have to call out the big hook. This was a slight derailment in Jersey City Yard. This was the foreman of the wreck crew. Now, most railroads had wreck trains. On a Jersey Central, we did not have any wreck trains. We had service trains because occasionally one of our locomotives or freight cars or passenger cars would need servicing. So we'd send a big hook out to service them. Now, this is a train that would need servicing.
40 miles an hour.
Yep. Yeah, that's good there. There are train masters. They used to run a lot of train masters double-headed on freight trains. Oh, back up one. That's where I had that one in here. One of the things I love best about my job in Jersey City was at the end of the day, we had to ride on a locomotive from the roundhouse to Jersey City Terminal, which was about a mile away. And I first day there, I said, how am I going to get there? And I said, these two guys take that trip every day. So they took me out, and we went up to a train master, and you see these footboards here? The three of us stood on these footboards and held our arm behind us and held onto this grab bar and rode facing out, facing toward the terminal on that train. And the track was really crappy, worn track. And the engine would be rocking back and forth and bouncing up and down. I said, my God, I'd work for free just for this ride every day. So as we got to the terminal, the engine was going, I think, over by track 20. The engineer would come to a very slow roll, and we'd jump off as the engine was moving. So I love that. Now on rainy days, yeah, I know I violated a rule or two, but I didn't know it until about 10 years ago when somebody told me. Now on rainy days, you didn't want to stand out there and get soaked. So we used to take the engine from the Crusader, climb up here, and sit in the cab with the engineer and ride up to the terminal. It was a tough life, I tell you. And here we are at Jersey City Terminal. And you could see the track work was really, really complicated here. You had double slip switches all over. Train shed covered 20 tracks, which is bigger than any other Bush train shed in the world. We had the Beano came in on the far side here. Here's Jersey City Terminal. Manhattan's over here. Here's Ellis Island. You can see how close it was. And here's Liberty Island with the Statue of Liberty. This was our dry docks for the CNJ Marine Fleet. They had a significant fleet of tugboats, barges, stick boats, all kinds of stuff, which could be another show if you'd like to see it sometime. This is a pair of tugboats, and this might look familiar. That's the World Trade Center going up. Most of that steel came in on a CNJ, and we had a whole several acres we called the steel yard. And that steel would come in by train, and each piece was numbered and lettered as to exactly where it was going. Tractor trailers would come in probably after 11 o'clock at night. The stuff would be loaded on the tractor trailers and go through the Holland Tunnel and over to a construction site. And I used to work in the World Trade Center when I worked for Morris County. Once a week I had to go over there to the 82nd floor. This is the engineer's view. The door is closed as you're pulling out of Jersey City Terminal. You can see the fancy track work, huge signal bridges. I think the longest signal bridge in America was at Jersey City. My next job, unfortunately, I got displaced by a senior employee who wanted to work my job at the roundhouse. So I got a job at Elizabethport in the offices of the Metro Freight, which is, we handle all the billing for the freight cars coming to customers anywhere in the Port Elizabeth area. So I'd get off the train here. Well, back up one if you can. There's a track here and a track here. The train would come in from Denellen on this track, so that, on this track, so that doors would open on both sides. If you were going to switch to a local to Bayonne or some other place, you'd stay on the platform. If you're going to the Newark branch, which crossed here, you'd get off on this side of the train and just walk over to the Newark branch. So I'd get off on this side of the tracks, but I had a mile to go to get to the Metro Freight, which was at the other end of the Elizabethport yards. No, that one there. So I got off over in this area, crossed this, and crossed the 6-track main line, another track, and then I walked through the Topsy yards, and then through the freight yards to get down to Metro Freight. And you could see numerous tracks there. Okay, next one. So I had to walk across these tracks. This was a Newark branch train. I used to go to Broad Street, Newark. So I'd have to walk down along here. This is our piggyback yard in Elizabethport. These were our trucks that pull the trailers off and put them back on. These are some of our piggyback trailers. These were the first piggyback trailers we had. And you notice there was Jersey Central lines. But when I was working on a railroad, I forget which president it was or trustee. I think it was Shoemaker. And I said, why did you change the name from Jersey Central Lines to Central Railroad Company of New Jersey, the original name? He says, because Jersey Central Lines sound too damn much like a trucking company. He says, we're railroads, we're not trucks. And that's how the name changed. This is one of our possum belly piggyback trailers. And this was the latest trailers before the CNJ was taken over by Conrail. That's a refrigerated one. Well, this is the yards I had to walk through. That's amazing. I was down here and I had to walk all along here and down here, and Metro Freight was in this area. And occasionally we'd have one of our locomotives derail. I think it was in 1972 or 71. The Star Ledger did a big front page story on the numerous derailments of the CNJ. I think in one 30-day period, we had over 42 derailments in New Jersey. But they were all minor things like this. They made it sound like major train wrecks. So now here's Metro Freight. You can see how long this building is. These are all box cars. So I get at the end of the platform, there's a ladder, walk up here, and my office was, these are all offices up here. And I liked working in there. I had 6 different jobs in 6 weeks. I started as a clerk typist, then I became a senior clerk typist, then a outstanding clerk typist, then I became a delinquent clerk. Then I became a senior delinquent clerk, Then I became an outstanding delinquent clerk. And I had passes to prove all of this too. And the delinquent clerks had to do with collecting bills that were overdue. First category was 30 days overdue, then it was 30 and I think 60 days, then it was overnight, over 60 days. And I loved the job. I didn't mind calling up these companies that owed us money. We were bankrupt. I'd explain to them politely, courteously, and I'd get payments probably from 90% of them. And I remember the boss came, he says, "How are you doing this?" Because the guys before me used to cuss at them, you owe us dollars. And one day I'm sitting in here looking out the window in the back, and I saw this huge mushroom cloud over Bayonne. And I yell, I says, "Look, mushroom cloud, looks like an atomic bomb going off." Well, at the end of Bayonne Avenue A, near the Bayonne Bridge, was a Texaco company. And they had just unloaded a ship of gasoline into the storage tanks. And it was leaving, and another ship was coming out, and they collided. And they caused a massive explosion. I think 12 people died in it. But it looked just like an atomic bomb went off. There was this giant mushroom cloud, and you could see the flames and the like. We also had, this was before the days of state lotteries, they had the numbers game where you could bet a nickel or a dime and get maybe $5 back if you got the right number. And the number was shown in the next day's New York Daily News, and it was a circulation number, the last 3 digits. And when they had the Newark Bay train wreck, there was a picture of one of the cars being raised, and everybody bet the number on that. And it came out, it almost bankrupted the mafia. It took them 3 weeks to pay off. Excuse me. One of the guys I worked with, Henry Neustadt, was an old timer, and he was telling me he was on this train, and he was down here in the water when it went off the bridge. And he said, I took that day off to go to New York. And he was telling me how he climbed out on the sides of the seats, seat by seat, until he got up to the end, and then he got helped out. So that was Metro Freight. Great place to work. I got, on my last job there, it was in December, and the job opened up in the Garwood Freight Station. The agent was retiring after 41 years. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to put in for that job." And they said, "You've got like 1 year seniority. What are you going to get?" The guy was there for 41 years. I was the only one to put a bid in for the job, and I got it. Everybody says, "Wow, Reilly got that job." So I go out here, had time locks on the door so you didn't need any keys to get in or to lock it. Walk into the place, and for a heating unit in the waiting room is this giant potbelly stove. And the station is fairly small. The waiting room went from here to here, and the office was small on the other side. And the coal bin was around the corner. I never fired one of these big stoves before. So that night I left, I piled of coal, made a big mound in the potbelly stove. Next morning I come in, this was January now, January 2nd. It was bitter cold out. I come in, it was freezing in there. I said, "What the heck happened?" I had tons of coal in there. And there was some notes, "We're freezing our asses off," and stuff like that from the commuters who had gotten in earlier. So that night, I took the little top off the stove and I filled it up so the coal was coming out the top. I said, "This thing is going to burn for a week." Come in the next day, stone cold. I said, "What am I doing wrong?" And the notes were getting nasty by now, and more frequent notes. So some old timer came in and he says, "How you doing, Sonny?" I says, "Well, I love the job." I said, "But I can't figure out how to fire this thing." He looks out, he says, "You ever hear of a damper?" I said, "No." He says, well, you have one on a smokestack on a chimney here, and it's wide open, which means that coal is gonna burn really fast. He says, what you do, he says, you close it and you just back off a hair. And he says, that'll let the fumes out. You'll have a nice fire in there. So I did that. Next morning, it's nice and toasty and a note saying, it's about time, idiot. And one day, I guess it was around 1 o'clock, this guy walks, no, we only had like, I think 4 or 5 commuter trains stopped there. And just about everybody had a pass, monthly ticket. So I'd sold 1 ticket that day. And this guy comes in, about a foot taller than me, whips out a huge knife, and he says, this is a holdup. I want all the money you took in today. And I'm thinking, he's not going to be a happy camper for $1.33 or whatever it was. So I said, thinking quick, I said, 1 minute, the money's in the safe in the back, I'll go back and get it. Ran around back through the office, climbed out the window, a half a block away is the Garwood police station. I go running up there. I says, I'm the agent at the Garwood station. There's a guy there with a big knife holding me up. So the desk sergeant says, we'll send our 2 patrol cars there right away. You run back and keep them busy. So without thinking, the cop told me to do it, so I'm following orders. I go running back, climb in the window. The guy's still standing there with the knife. And just as I got in the window, first police car comes and the cop's out there with his gun and nailed the guy. They handcuffed him. As they're taking him out, he says, how much would I have gotten? I said, I sold 1 ticket for $1.33. And I have never heard so many curse words. I'm going to jail for $1.33. But one of the things I liked about this job, you could look right out this window from my desk, and I got 2 mirrors, and I mounted them under the eaves. And the track was straight away for several miles here. And I could see trains starting up at Cranford, because when they'd start, I'd see the plume of diesel smoke. I could see them from Westfield in the other direction. When I saw them coming, I'd pick up my camera, wait till I got close enough, walk out in the cold, take some pictures, walk back inside. So I took loads of really nice pictures here, which I'll show you. Oh, first day on the job, second day on the job, I get a call and said, we didn't get your report on whatever it was I was supposed to send a report in on. And I said, well, we had nothing to report. There's nothing happening. Well, didn't you ever hear of a nothing to report form? I said, to be perfectly honest, I haven't. No, what is a nothing to report form? So this is it. CNJ, nothing to report form. And I said, why do you need a form when nothing's to be reported? And he says, we have to have a piece of paper for that date that says nothing occurred.
Wow. Should have been the lawyer.
And speaking of lawyers, I'd just like you all to know that we have CNJ's final attorney here, John Fiorella, who's done a superb job for the CNJ. I worked with him for several years. Welcome, John.
I was a really young lawyer then.
You didn't know any better either, right?
He's a really old lawyer now.
I'm like you. I learned typing in high school, right? And when I was there, I could never get anything typed because I was the last one. And I shared the same secretary with Mr. Walkenfeld.
Oh.
Right? So I couldn't get that. So one day, I took one of these typewriters, I got in my office, I typed a letter. Oh my God, it was their havoc. I said, you can't do that.
That's
You're
right.
not qualified.
Changing craft lines.
I said to him, well, you're not qualified. I type really good letters. They go, no, you can't do that. So they made this deal that if I closed my door, they'd let me do it.
No.
So I could type my letters. And in those days, we're typing with carbon paper.
Oh, that's right.
That carbon paper. Oh, what a mess. What a mess that was.
Yep.
We had the very first photocopier. It had one page at a time, and it had that stuff on it, that chemical that smelled.
Yes.
The The very first one, we had it.
And we had the early IBM machines where you had the cardboard cards that they had to
They had
punch
cardboard,
cards.
And then they had the thing which had like a tape, and they would punch the tape. And
Yes.
then the tape could make copies.
Yes.
That was something. Noisy as hell, though.
Oh, yeah.
The office was so noisy. I mean,
When I worked on in freight sales, one of my new customers was Union Tab Card, and they produced these tab cards for the IBM computers. It was on the Railway Valley Railroad. I remember going into their office, they had a 2-car siding which was covered. And I talked to their traffic manager, I said, "Where are you getting your paper from?" They said, "Canada." I said, "And you're getting it all by truck?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "We get up to 18 or 20 trucks a day, tractor trailers." I says, "Well, why aren't you using a railroad? I mean, you have this beautiful siding here." And he says, "Because we get the paper in, and a quarter of it would be bruised, and we couldn't use it. We had to throw it away." And I said, "Give me 2 cars." And I says, "We're going to put on it, do not hump, because that was not shown on our bill of ladings."
oh, geez.
I said, "I'm going to put impact recorders in those cars to see where damage is taking place." And I said, "We'll have it to you within 12 days. And I knew it was going to take 5 days. 2 cars come in, they were perfect. Do not hump work, because they were humping the cars, and when they were slamming other cars, they were damaging the paper. So we wound up getting, within the first 2 months after that, between 7 and 10 carloads of paper a day.
Wow.
And for some reason, the Railway Valley thought I was walking on water. They said, "This is great. We never get this much new business."
Well, the people at CNJ were the nicest people. Everybody really knew everybody.
Yeah,
And, you know, when we had our second baby, everybody came to my house. They all
Yep.
came to my house, the whole office. Everybody came, you know. I had to see the baby. I mean, it was amazing.
yeah.
And I lived in Passaic
it was
County.
really-
They had to go all the way to freaking Clifton, and they did.
It was really the CNJ family.
Yeah, it was.
Every place I worked, it was like that. Everybody was willing to teach you, to help you, and everything.
They were really nice, you know, to everybody, and I was really young. I mean, you know, we were talking. I'm 26.
Yeah.
Right? I'm the youngest person there,
Yeah,
and so all these people, they had kids my age, so
Yep,
they were
yep.
all looking after me. Especially all the women, they're looking after you, right? It was really.
well, you're good looking then.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it was. Yeah, it was.
Oh, that didn't come out. I'm sorry, John. That
Yeah,
didn't come
but
out right.
It was something though. It was really quite a place to be. And I remember the last night when Conrail came. We had a party, but we had a wake is what we had. But we couldn't do it. You know, we're really with the rules. You couldn't have liquor in the office. You had to go to a restaurant.
That's right.
And people were crying. And it was
Yeah.
really something. Because everybody on the CNJ had a relative. That's how they all got hired.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was there, they would all tell me their story,
Yeah.
right? How did I get hired? Who did I know? Right? They all had stories.
Yep.
And the only exception to that were the lawyers. We weren't related to anybody, or we weren't related to each other either. We were the only department. Everybody else had a story. I remember one guy told me a story. He says, so I'm in court. I'm waiting for my turn. This is my witness. So I said, "How'd you get on there?" He says, "Look," he says, "about 20 years ago, I was out of a job." He said, "I see in the Star Ledger there was a wreck, and the engineer was killed, and it gave his name. So next day I showed up and said I was his cousin. They hired me on the spot."
No.
True story. These guys were too much. That's true. And then depending on who you are, right? If you were Italian, you worked in the shops,
Yeah.
right? Right? And they all of the engineers and all, they were Irish mostly. The black guys worked on the tracks,
Yep.
right? I mean, they had all these. It was really something to see that, but that's how it was.
Yeah. These are some of the pictures that I took at the Garwood station
Oh wow!
about 4 or 5. One of the things that was part of this job, which is why nobody else bid on it, which I didn't realize, was that you had to make a track check of all of the freight cars along the line, which would start on the west end of Westfield. Then you'd walk through the Westfield station and up the tracks to Garwood. And we had maybe 12 or 15 customers. And starting on January 2nd was a bitter cold day. And I'm out there with a little book and I'm marking down each car. Where there was tank cars in, I had to climb up on a tank car with the railroad spike and tap the end of it to see how much liquid was still in them.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
It was an interesting job, but I loved it. I took my camera and I got pictures of trains flying past me. The
Oh, the smell is
engineers
really
would
cool.
toot their horn to
Cool.
me.
Cool pictures. Wow.
Ah,
This is the Reading Wall Street coming through.
Wall Street, yeah. You ready?
Reading Freight.
Down Brook.
Now, this is all Garwood.
It's all still at Garwood.
Yep. This is a light engine move for the B&O. And you can just see the way the ice is here and the way it's kicking up. It was really cold.
He doesn't look like the shop
There's CNJ Combine. And actually, I had my Army winter parka, which used to every day. That was for when we'd go up north in the wintertime on war maneuvers. And one time we were out for 3 weeks straight, the hottest it got was 12. And for 1 week, we had to live in little tents or on the armored personnel carriers, and they had no heaters. So they gave us, we had Arctic parkas, and then you had a coat under that, and then you had long johns
Oh, my God.
and special winter shirts.
You can move?
And you couldn't put your finger in the trigger on a rifle. So we had big mittens that went up to your elbow, leather mittens, and it had a little loop on it. And that was your trigger finger mittens. You put the loop on the trigger so you could pull it.
Wow.
But a lot of guys used to get frostbite out there. There's a interesting pair, EMD in Fairbanks Morse. And these Fairbanks Morse engines, I remember going out to Eport, and this was just before the old Dean plant in '67. And I was just taking pictures of the trains heading west because the sun was perfect out there. And there were other rail fans with me, and I said, I'd take pictures of every train. And I'd say, why aren't you taking pictures of the train masters? They're beautiful. They've been around for a long time. They're never going to leave. Well, we got a motive power superintendent from the B&O, and guess what he hated? Fairbanks Morse train masters. And within 3 days, everyone was removed from service. And these rail friends said, oh, why didn't they take pictures? This was the drill that served Cranford and Westfield and Garwood. The engineer was Warren Crater on this drill train. And they used to decorate their caboose for their Christmas season. And I remember the day or two before Christmas, the train would stop in front of the station in Garwood. And it would be packed with liquor. The crew would be standing outside because there was so much liquor they got as gifts they couldn't get in. Then one day, Vice President of Labor of Employee Relations comes out to Garwood Station, and he says, I see you've been going to Rutgers nights. I says, yeah, I've been going on a GI Bill a couple of nights a week, doing 3 classes each night. He says, what do you take out? I says, I'm doing labor relations and business management. He says, would you like a job in headquarters? And I says, doing what? He says, well, under the old Dean plan, all of the different unions that are adversely affected, their employees, are guaranteed those wages that they earned before old Dean for 4 to 5 years, depending on what craft. And we need somebody to administer this program. I said, can I get bumped? He said, no. I said, I'll take it. He said, I didn't even tell you how much you're gonna get paid. I says, if I can't get bumped, I'll take it. So I got the job. I dealt with 16 unions for 3 years. I met with all the general chairmen first, went over all of the ground rules, who agreed to what. I says, now I'm not out here to stick a knife in your back. I says, I'm here to treat you fairly because you agreed upon certain things, management agreed. And I says, I'm just here to make sure everything goes as agreed. And it took a few months before they realized that I wasn't out to do them under. And it got to the point where it became absolutely boring because it got to the point where the chairman of the IBEW, electricians, came to me one day and he said, Frank, he says, one of our brothers comes to work drunk every day. He said, we want your management to fire him. He's putting further workers in jeopardy of being injured. He says, but it's nothing against you, Frank. I says, I believe you, I believe you. Andy Ventura, his name was. And we went on, the guy got fired. And I said, you know, there's really no excitement much to this job. So I started helping out in personnel when somebody was sick or wanted to go on vacation, take a few days off. And an old timer by the name of Joe Siegfried was the pass clerk. And I used to help him out, and he was a real character. I remember I forgot my pass one day, and I said, Joe, I said, I need a one-day pass to get home on a train. So he types the thing out, and he says, Frank Reilly, Labor Relations Department, to asshole of the world. And I said, I can't use that. And he says, that's all you're getting. So I used it, and the conductor looked at it. He says, oh, you're going to Denellen. And I hired several people on the railroad, like I mentioned, Charlie Batcha. And I enjoyed working in personnel. And there's some other stories which I can't tell you about it, but next slide. Oh, my name was, they gave me the title analyst. I said, what's an analyst? And they says, well, there's no title in the railroad regulations for what you're going to be doing. So we came up with the name analyst. So that's how my pass read analyst on it. And nobody knew what an analyst was, so I got to do anything on the railroad anywhere. This is the personnel office. That's Tony Colucci, used to do the hiring. He's the guy who hired me. That's Joe Siegfried. He is the pass bureau. And we did imbibe in some liquid beverages up there on occasion.
Where was the office?
That was at 1100 Raymond Boulevard.
Oh, yeah, right. That's where I started.
Yeah. It was known as the SOB, the State Office Building.
That's right.
We had the top, the 5th floor, and half of the 4th floor.
You know, that building was owned by a Hasidic
I know.
Jew. He used to come around and check on all his tenants. He looked in your office. This guy's a long beard, the things. Who's this guy? I said, he owns the building. And he'd come and look. He owned the state office building. We had the 5th floor.
When I first started working for the railroad, I worked in Newark on Halsey. And this is the CNJ
Right, right.
office on Broad Street, Newark.
Oh, yeah.
And you notice,
Well, that was a station too, right?
yeah, it's a major station.
Major
yeah.
station.
This was a nice copper sign that was lit at New Jersey Central.
You got it, right?
No, somebody
Somebody
beat
else
me
got it.
to
I
it.
remember that sign was there a long time.
But these were kind of neat things that were the original heralds for the CNJ. There they are.
That was on the
That was on the front of the
seal.
station,
On the
yeah.
seal. The
Corporate seal,
Yeah. I have
which I
that.
have one.
I have them too. Yeah.
This
Oh,
is
yeah.
inside the station. Who is that handsome young guy?
John Fiorelli.
This guy here. Let's see you. Wow.
That's me getting one of the trains home. when I was working in Newark. Yeah, the train took you to Eport, Elizabethport, and you changed trains there. As you can see here, Elizabethport changed for us. And there's good old Denellen. My God, they stopped at Grant Avenue, Clinton Avenue. They had 4 tracks in there. They had these nice bush train sheds to keep you dry. And the train that I had 3 cars on it, had 2 coaches and 1 combine. And it was always packed with people. And as an employee, you couldn't take a seat. You had to stand if the train was packed or crowded. And we'd be in the baggage compartment of the combine, and we'd be standing in there like almost at attention, shoulder to shoulder. And if the train lurched or anything, you really didn't move because you were packed in so tight.
You have a long bench from there too, right?
Yeah, yeah. Here's one of the trains coming out of the terminal past the tower. NA Tower for Newark. We also had towers such as BS. Here I am. And when I did when I convinced the vice president of freight operations, which I still had this pass for, to do a management show, since we're getting a lot of new managers from the B&O Railroad up on the CNJ, I said, they know nothing about our railroad. I says, why don't you give me 2 weeks, unlimited slide film, and let me cover the railroad from end to end, and I'll put together a management orientation show. And he said, okay. He says, give me your pass. I gave him the pass. He comes back with it with this stamped on it. And I said, now, does life get any better than that? And here was my sales manager. I started off as a district freight manager covering Elizabeth and Port Newark complex. And the first day I went out to Port Newark, I knew nothing about it. Oh, I knew nothing about freight seals either. Your training was, you sat at a tiny desk for 1 week and you read tariffs, which was like reading the New York Yellow Pages. I had no idea what I was reading, but after a week, you were a freight sales manager. So I go out to the port and introduce myself to the port manager. And I said, is there any chance you could show me around one of these days so I know what I'm looking at? He says, what are you doing next Tuesday morning around 10? I says, nothing. He says, well, come on out. He says, I'll get the helicopter. I says, you'll get the helicopter? He says, yeah, the Port Authority helicopter. We'll go by helicopter. He says, you could see it all better. I said, can I bring my camera? He says, sure. So we went over to Port Newark. Took us about 10 minutes. He says, what do you want to do now? I says, what do you mean? He says, we have the helicopter to 1 o'clock. I says, can we go over by the Statue of Liberty and then go up the Hudson River and then come back inland? He said, yeah. We flew to as we're flying over Bayonne, we're flying over Motby, Military Ocean Terminal. And they had the largest dry dock on the east coast of the United States there, military ships. And they had 4 ships being restocked. And one of them was the battleship New Jersey. And I got purchase of all of this stuff. It was a beautiful sunny day. Then he takes us up to the Statue of Liberty. He says something to the pilot, and the pilot gets really close to it. And he said, did you get any good pictures? I said, not really. I said, you're too close. So he circled it again a little further away for some more pictures. Then we went up to the GW Bridge, Washington Bridge, went inland and came back down. And that was a great, great day. Got loads of super photos. And people say, how did you ever get those pictures? And then I told my boss about it, and he gives me hell. He says, I had to write you up for this. I says, for what? He said, if that helicopter would have crashed, we would have lost a freight salesman. And then he tells the vice president of freight sales, and the vice president comes to me and says, Frank, you think you can arrange that trip for me? No problem. So in freight seals, I had mugs made up. These are made by Libby's Glass, which was one of our big customers. And I used to give them out to all of our customers. Freight seals was a great job. And I think this might be the end of the show. It is. So thank you very much, folks. Anybody have any questions? Questions? No, but I didn't tell you. 1972, well, Railroad was in bankruptcy since I started to work for him in '66, and I had nothing to do with him going into bankruptcy. But I was engaged to get married in August of '72. We had gone management 3 years without a raise, and it was, I think, 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas, and they gave us a 10% reduction in wages. We also had payless paydays. And that would, you usually get paid on a Friday, but if they didn't have enough money in the bank to cover the checks, you wouldn't get a payroll check until Monday or Tuesday when they had enough money in the bank to pay it all.
When John got back from Congress.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
They did that. There were days there was not enough money. We had a legal obligation to pay, especially had to pay all the union people.
Yep.
And so we had this meeting. We said, well, maybe we can get some money from the federal government.
Yes.
And so what?
USDOT.
And so what we did is we got the union guys in and we said, here's the plan, guys. We're gonna bring everybody into New York. We're gonna, just like nothing's wrong. Then, after those trains are in, we're gonna announce that we don't have any money. And then you're gonna announce that you're not gonna take them home. And then we're gonna announce that we're gonna try to get this extra money from the federal government. And those people called.
Yep.
And then they put me on a train. I went to Washington, I got the money, came back, and really did that.
Yep.
And then the next time we did it in Trent.
Yep.
Yeah, we got more money from Trent.
And that flip-flop. So anyway, I said, and this was in February '72, I said, I'm ready to get married this summer. I said, I can't afford working for the railroad and going through all of this stuff. And just about then, somebody sent me a newspaper clipping, help wanted from Morris County. And they wanted to start a Department of Transportation Management. So I applied for the job. 22 other guys were called in on, or 21 other guys, and myself were called in for an interview. They narrowed it down to 3 of us. We had to go before the whole county freeholder board. The other 2 guys had a college degree. I had zip. I had like 2 years going nights. And I remember the freeholder director said to me, he says, well, Mr. Reilly, you know, he said, the other 2 candidates have a college degree and you don't. What do you have to say for yourself? And I said, well, let's see. Worked on the railroad for 3 years, representing management, dealing with 16 different unions, and I never had one grievance. I think that qualifies me for at least a master's degree. And they did just what most of you did. They got a big smile, they laughed, and they nodded their head. Next thing you know, I had the job, and I was working with the founder of Tri-State, Tom Tabor.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
That was, yeah, you were there a long time, right? How many years were you there?
66 to 72, not that long. Boy, I had a very great number of different jobs, and I loved every one. And I can tell you, if you have a job that you love, it's not like working.
Remember the time with the M&E, we had to sue, and I had to sue Frank, because it was his job. I call up, Frank, I gotta sue you.
You dirty dog.
I'll take it personally.
Yeah, I had the county DOT for 32 years. And then they offered the county administrator wanted to get an early retirement. And the union said, if you give him an early retirement package, you have to offer it to everybody.
Oh.
So they offered it to everybody. And I love my job so much, I really wasn't going to take it. Because not only did I have roads and bridges, but I had the county buy the High Bridge branch and the Dover and Rockaway branch. Conrail claimed they were losing over 600,000 a year on it.
You do all the buses too,
The
right?
first year, or the first 6 months of county ownership, we made 66,000 profit. And I remember going to the freeholders and giving them the report on it, and they said, Frank, we're the government, we're not supposed to make money. I says, well, I have a flaw. I came from the private sector where we're supposed to make money.
What a problem to have.
Yeah, and the county still owns those 2 railroads plus another one that I got them to buy after I retired.
Only 2 counties left now. that
Yeah, and I
have
also
railroads.
ran buses. I created 10 bus routes in the county, fixed route buses. And when casino gambling came to Atlantic City, my counterpart from Essex County, which was a Democratic county, Morris County was Republican, we got together. We got a bill passed that resulted in a change to the state constitution to permit casino tax revenues to be spent for seniors and disabled residents, and the money would go to counties and to New Jersey Transit. So when I left the county in '72, I had 54 minibuses in that system that ran throughout the whole county.
They weren't buses, weren't they deluxe
Minibus.
motor coaches?
We had, they
Deluxe
weren't too
motor
deluxe.
coaches?
We always got secondhand or third-hand buses, and some of the buses we had, I remember 2 of them in particular, they burned 16, 18 quarts of oil a day. And people would call and say, are you working for the mosquito commission? Because of the blue exhaust coming out the back of them. One lady called me one day, she said, when are you gonna move your statues? I said, what statues? He says, well, it says Morris County Road Department on it, and there's 3 guys standing out there leaning on shovels for about 15 minutes. So, lots of great stories. I have lots more on the CNJ I could do. When I was in freight sales, I dealt with numerous short lines. Warway Valley, I had a great relationship with them. Also, when I worked in Garwood, I went up in the attic and I found a stack of old Warway Valley public timetables in the World War I going to some ammunition plant somewhere along the Warway Valley.
Wow.
Those fun days.
Top secret stuff.
Yeah.
Before you,
I've got some souvenir tickets. If anybody like any tickets, these are probably from the 40s. And
before you sit down, Frank, are there any other CNJ vets besides John, Walt, anybody else? Why don't you guys come down? We'll take a picture. There was also a question from our audience at home wondering if you had enough material from the helicopter trip to do another presentation.
let me put it this way. I have about 5,000 CNJ slides. So I could do the next 3 years.
We'll book it.
But I've got lots of great stories from these different adventures I had, being in train wrecks.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts? We have an awful lot of knowledge here. You're not in on the CNJ action, are you, Carl? No?
When I was,
You came later?
when they were hiring me, my boss Rockefeller says to me, you know, I can't guarantee you'll get paid every week. I said, look,
2 out of 3 in bed?
I want
Yeah.
this. I want this job. But if you don't pay me, you can never tell my wife you told me. He says, I promise. I promise.
And this is Carl Belke. He was with the
Delaware and Hudson.
Carl actually saved us. We had a presentation very early on in our remote era, and we were doing some D&H stuff, and I saw Carl in the audience. I sent him a message, would you mind joining us? Because
Great.
our presenter was kind of being challenged with some questions. I said, get the guy who was there. Maybe he would know.
Yep.
Let's ask him. And Carl jumped on and did a great job with us. So,
Well,
Super.
my association with CNJ is that when I was going to school in Easton, I hung out in TU Tower with the operator every night, you know, and he actually let me run the tower and everything.
Yep.
Oh.
Fantastic.
Rich, would you mind? Yeah.
Hey, Rich.
If you'd be so kind.
Okay. Everybody ready?
Yep.
Nice, thank you. Oh,
Thank
sorry.
you, Rich.
And I must mention that Rich Wisniewski, his first job was with one of the finest Morris County Department of Transportation directors. Me. I hired him fresh out of college, and he was one of the best workers I ever had.
Rich is an all-around good guy, and I don't know how many people, maybe, we don't see Rich too often at a meeting, but he's been a long-time member and big supporter of a lot of things we're doing, so.
Yep.
Thank you, Frank.
Hey, thank you
Always a
very
pleasure.
much. Pleasure was mine.
Good stuff. Let me move this so nobody.
Oh, yeah. So I have some old tickets up here. If you'd like to take a couple, help yourself to them.
Did you ever shoot at Lake Junction in Morgan?
Lots of stuff up there.